Steerpike knew at once that yet another chapter was over in his relationship with Cora and Clarice. They had become clay in his hands, but they were clay no more, unless there is in clay not only something imponderable, but something sinister also. You lost control of your creation, you fool, just like Mary Shelley's Frankenfurter. Or like Republican leaders lost control. They've created a monster and it's coming for them. For us. But why? Why? Why did they create this monster in the first place? Why? Did they create it, or was it always there? Why? Why do they dislike us so much? It's more than dislike, it's hatred. Why? They hate us enough to hurt us. Why? One only harms that which one fears. Why? Are they afraid of us? Why? They are afraid. Why? Why do they hate us? Why? Why do they hate us? What do you think, you hideous thing? I'll tell you what I think. Since 1978, the University of Michigan and Stanford University have run the American National Election Studies, an academic survey of American voters' attitudes about issues and political figures. The survey shows that American partisans are more dissatisfied with their own political parties than at any time in the previous 40 years. Yet elections show that party loyalty is at an all-time high. Why are partisans so loyal to a party they do not like? Because the opposition is worse. The opposition is dangerous. The opposition is illegitimate and un-American. Correct. Republicans feel that way about Democrats, and Democrats feel that way about Republicans. There was a time when the two parties had ideological overlap, and local, state, and regional politics predominated. That time is over, because the two parties have drifted so far apart. That drift began with partisan sorting. Conservative Democrats found a new home in the Republican Party, while liberal Republicans were gradually pushed out of the GOP. Aligning with one party or the other said something about one's values in a way it didn't before. That's a good way to put it. The parties now have little in common. They have nothing on which they can compromise. And the rise of conservative media made compromise look like sleeping with the enemy. Ah, conservative media. Once media ownership rules changed, suddenly you had rich conservatives subsidizing unprofitable and uncompetitive rural media markets, and turning them into propaganda mills. Perfectly decent country folk and small-town folk were suddenly inundated with lies that turned them against other Americans. Urban Americans. Minority Americans. Once the malefactors of great wealth started telling people that Democrats were the devil, local politicians had a choice: play along or get replaced. Those playing along were eventually replaced by true believers anyway, or became true believers themselves. I think it was Kurt Vonnegut who said, "We are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be." They pretended they were ready to fight a revolution. They became insurrectionists. Don't remind me. You remember what they did to us at the Blanchard. Yes, they were ordinary people once. I'm sure that before conservative talk radio, they never imagined that they would one day... Let's not dwell on that. It's enough to say that by getting their news from media intended to indoctrinate rather than inform, Republicans now have, shall we say, interesting opinions on what constitutes good governance. Namely, they don't believe good governance is possible. Pretty much. And because things are so tribal now, it's exceedingly difficult for politicians to distinguish themselves from their national parties. And the tribes can't speak to each other either. Any political discussion turns tribal immediately. That's why I prefer to talk history. I believe that knowing history provides partial protection against propaganda. If people can agree on a common history, perhaps we can bridge the gap. History is inherently political, and even if it wasn't, we still can't agree on a common history. And even if we could, they don't want to bridge the gap. Their personality types won't allow it. Their personality types won't allow it. Ah. I wonder where she's going. No idea. I know why they hate us. Don't get up.
I wasn't going to. Who hates us?
Trumpists. I know why they hate us.
Why do they hate us?
Well, why do you hate them?
Because they're assholes. Are you drunk?
No. No? Yes. You have to understand, I've been having trouble sleeping. The attack on the Capitol... I'm triggered. Storming the Capitol was just the Blanchard incident on a national scale.
What is the Blanchard incident?
I don't want to talk about it.
Isn't that when you lost your face?
Quiet, I'm thinking. Oh, I had it. Fear of loss of privilege, loss of status, and something to do with negative particles.
What, you mean like electrons and stuff?
Partisans, not particles. You know, the people who support a political party because they hate another party.
I can relate to that.
It's about personality. The big 5 personality traits are extroversion, stability, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma.
The last 3 are D&D stats.
Oh yes. Ocean. The big 5 are openness to new experiences, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and eroticism. Neuroticism. I've had too much to drink. But the big 5 are related to negative partisanship. If you're extroverted, agreeable, and not neurotic, you're less likely to be a negative partisan.
What counts as neurotic?
That's emotional stability. The more neurotic you are, the more frequently and deeply you feel anxiety, nervousness, anger, sadness, frustration. Combined, those are more likely to make you a negative partisan. Extroversion and agreeableness work to break down barriers between people, whereas introverted and/or unpleasant people are more likely to welcome those barriers and even find a justification for cutting themselves off from others.
You know, I've cut myself off from all the Trumpistas in my life. Am I unpleasant?
Negative partisans cut themselves off from others by centering their differences from other people. Beliefs, values, other social characteristics such as race, religion, and gender.
Especially race, I know.
You are not wrong. There are genuine policy disagreements over what government should do, otherwise bipartisanship would be possible and there'd be a lot less animus between the two parties. But the single most important factor behind negative partisanship is the growing racial divide between Democrats and Republicans.
So, racism.
To be more precise, racial resentment.
What's the difference? It's white supremacy either way.
White supremacy is the conviction that whites are inherently superior. Racial resentment is basic hostility.
No, like I care. It's still racism.
The thing is, racial resentment has been measured over time. Back in the Reagan years, a little over 40% of whites exhibited high racial resentment. By Obama's time, it had climbed to just over 50%. But racial resentment exhibited by white Democrats has gradually decreased, while that exhibited by white Republicans has gone sharply up.
Obama made them more racist?
You'd think that, but no. It's been a steady increase over 3 decades, and it appears to have been triggered by the growing visibility and influence of non-whites within the Democratic Party. This happened at the same time that the GOP was trying to win over Southern conservatives.
Who were racist to begin with?
Everyone's a little bit racist sometimes. I think it's an instinct deep in our primate brains.
Yeah, but we should know better than to listen to our racist monkey brains.
Nevertheless, a lot of us do. Racial attitudes have been driving Republican whites further right. In fact, research by the Varieties of Democracy Institute, hosted by the University of Gothenburg, shows that while Democrats haven't shifted too much in their commitment to liberal democracy since 1982, Republicans have become increasingly hostile to democracy, and are now ideological cousins of right-wing extremist parties such as Fidesz in Hungary, Vox in Spain, or AfD in Germany.
Being a cousin to right-wing extremists in Germany is not a good look.
Well, think about how someone like me looks to them. They perceived left-leaning whites like me as weak, effete, decadent. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you.
You would have died. How did they ever get that impression?
Because they are willing to resort to violence to get their way, and we are not.
Speak for yourself.
I'm not kidding. You saw what happened in Washington. That's a direct result of negative partisanship, increased dissatisfaction with democracy.
They hate democracy because they hate the Democratic Party?
As negative partisans, Republican voters are more likely to want to dismantle a system that allows Democrats to compete. The fact that the Democratic Party even exists is, to them, proof the system is broken.
I feel the same way about Republicans. Their whole thing is tax cuts for the rich and racism for the poor.
But do you think their existence goes against the proper order of the universe?
What? No. And democracy needs competition, but this Republican Party shouldn't exist. It shouldn't get as many votes as it does.
That's a good answer. I was expecting you to say no, it shouldn't, and then I could say, aha, that's negative partisanship for you.
I don't know what answer you want. I hate them because they're assholes. And what you mean by proper order of the universe?
I bring it up because for the longest time my hypothesis about why they hate us is that we violate the proper order of the universe, or at the very least we complicate their worldview.
What's that even mean?
Well... From the conservative point of view, there is a certain order to the universe. A natural hierarchy, often expressed in religious terms, in which authority flows from the top to the bottom. God grants authority to select humans, who exercise authority over other humans and every living thing. That's their universal order. Broadly speaking, there is also social order. Normal people are the standard by which a person is ranked in society. In the United States, normal means white, cisgender, male, straight, Christian, neurotypical, able-bodied, and middle class. For each of these you lack, move down one social rank. The only thing that elevates rank is wealth. Sounds like an oversimplification to me, but useful for quick explanations. Conservatives have no problem with being ranked below a rightful authority because that's normal. Being ranked below someone who's not in the normal pecking order is seen as usurpation. For example, conservatives reject freedom of religion if it means that Muslims or Jews or atheists get treated as well as Christians. They're usurping a social status reserved for Christians. Feminists seek to usurp a status reserved for men. Liberals and leftists who want fair economic outcomes for the working poor seek social anarchy. Well, yes, a lot of us on the left are anarchists. Conservatives don't understand anarchy. They think it's violent chaos. They can't envision a world without a hierarchical order. An unjust hierarchy is better than none at all, especially if one holds a privileged position thanks to that injustice. Even if one is in a low position in the hierarchy, it's still nice to believe one belongs somewhere. Otherwise, one is alone in an indifferent universe, and life is suddenly much more complicated. Reality is much more complicated than most people want it to be. When we don't completely comprehend something, there's ambiguity in our understanding. But we don't deal well with ambiguity because ambiguity can hide danger. The right is much more uncomfortable with ambiguity than the left. When a social category such as race... Better example. Gender and sex are bimodal rather than binary.
What's the difference?
Binary means there's only two options. Bimodal means two options predominate, but there are other options. All those less common options complicate the world. So with regard to sex and gender, conservatives would be happier if intersex and transgender people didn't exist. That way high school biology is all they ever need.
I have to admit, I didn't learn about intersex and transgender people in high school biology.
Sex is more complicated than high school biology lets on. We learn about X and Y chromosomes. We don't always learn about androgens and embryonic development. Not that it would make a difference.
Conservatives don't want to learn about that.
Right. You can explain how we all start out as female embryos, that a Y chromosome tells a gene on another chromosome to start producing androgens to change the female body to male, that if those androgens run out before the brain develops, you end up with a female brain in a male body, and that's one theory of male to female gender dysphoria. You can explain it, and conservatives will still make that stupid attack helicopter joke.
That's because, like I keep telling you, they're assholes.
They're just trying to defend their worldview. In theory, conservative thought leaders could guide their constituents into a better understanding of the world. In practice, they can't, because a more complicated world is more ambiguous and scary.
Yeah, the conservatives are themselves pretty damn scary. They support Trump even after the attack on the Capitol. He sicked them on his own people, like Pence and McConnell.
Because they weren't backing up his lie with action. Conservative leaders have become more willing to lie to their voters. Some of it is self-defense. In 2012, a focus group of Republican voters had the party's platform explained to them, and they refused to believe it was genuine because it was so cartoonishly evil.
Like stealing Social Security from old people to give to rich people.
Right. Sometimes the lies are just a power move. You deny reality because your will is stronger than reality.
Trump does that.
Yes, he does. He's always managed to cheat his way out of bad situations, and even if his supporters know he cheats, they don't care. What matters is that he is unconstrained as a leader, as a ruler should be. Through their support of him, they too are unconstrained, as privileged people should be.
That's why they're so surprised when they break into the Capitol and get arrested afterward.
Pretty much. Until Trump faces consequences, he will continue to be their leader, anointed by God. Speaking of which, some of these lies are magical thinking. By willing the world to be a certain way, you can make it so.
Yeah, but the world doesn't change just because you want it to. You can only deny reality for so long.
Yes, and right now the rhetoric of the Republican Party is basically gaslighting on a national scale. They bungled the pandemic response and crashed the economy, but have told their voters that everything is fine, and the only reason the economy isn't doing well is because Anthony Fauci frightened everyone.
And their pandemic response is why I think you're wrong about why they hate us.
Oh, do tell.
All they had to do was ask people to mask up, frame it as a patriotic call to duty. Not complicated.
You're right. Before tonight, I had been thinking that they hate us because we complicate their world. But now I'm thinking, they hate us because we are right. And they are wrong, and it's been that way for a very long time. The scientific method can be summarized as empirical observation, followed by generation of hypotheses to explain those observations, which are then tested with further observations and external verification. From the time that humanity began relying on the scientific method to generate new knowledge, older knowledge has been challenged. Some of this older knowledge derived from religious sources and was not knowledge at all, but rational assumptions about the nature of a divinely ordered universe. Galileo wrote a dialogue comparing heliocentrism and geocentrism and got rewarded for his efforts with lifetime house arrest by the church. Yes, his interpretation of his observations was at odds with what the church preached. His dialogue challenged what was believed to be divine wisdom. You know, I've always wondered why he wrote that book as a dialogue. Oh, I think dialogues are a much more interesting way of exploring a topic than just a plain lecture, don't you think? They're certainly more fun.
Hello? We're right and they're wrong?
Oh, yes. Well, science has been expanding the boundaries of human knowledge for a couple of centuries now, and new discoveries are constantly challenging old traditional beliefs.
Like evolution versus creationism.
Good example. Some people cling to traditional beliefs but still want those beliefs to appear to be based in scientific fact. They will twist science to those ends. Creation science came about when Christian fundamentalists could no longer get overt creationism taught in schools, so they had to evolve. More appallingly, scientific racism came about as a useful justification for European colonialism, eugenic discrimination, and of course, slavery. It always comes back to slavery, doesn't it? Slavery is America's original sin. The Americas were colonized with slavery. It was a violent and brutal system that made a lot of people wealthy and powerful. Such people have always gone to great lengths to justify their wealth and power. In this case, they embraced scientific racism. As abolitionists made the moral case against slavery, a lot of Americans accepted a view of race that justified, even demanded, the persistence of slavery. You had Dr. Samuel Cartwright arguing that a slave's desire to escape was a manifestation of mental illness. You had slavery supporters claiming that free blacks suffered mental illnesses at 10 times the rate of slaves. America also produced Madison Grant, avid environmentalist, progressive, and racial purist. He wrote the book on Nordic racial superiority. Literally. The Passing of the Great Race, published in 1916, argued that some whites were whiter than others and had to maintain their purity. It was a huge inspiration to the Nazis. Adolf Hitler wrote Grant a fan letter, saying that book was his Bible. To a lot of Americans, these facts are new, and the existence of people like Grant really challenges their views of American greatness. We don't respond well to new facts, and often persist in believing stuff that has been disproved. Now, believing factually false things is stressful. This stress is called cognitive dissonance, and it can be reduced by rejecting the facts which cause this stress.
And that's where alternative facts come in.
Yes, cognitive dissonance makes us receptive to reassuring lies. Propaganda, whether based on facts or on lies, works best on those who want to believe it, and none of us are immune to propaganda. Where was I going with this?
God knows.
Oh yes. We're social animals, we form tribes, and we try to persuade others of the tribe to like us. People who assert that the tribe's members are better, smarter, or have superior morals compared to other tribes make the members feel good, and they gain status in the tribe.
I know. You said something like that when we were talking about QAnon.
So who are the highest status individuals in American conservatism? Bullshitters. People who can tell conservative voters that they're the moral ones. People who can paint anyone left of center as immoral. And that's a heavy lift given that we've been in the right far more often than we've been in the wrong. In the 19th century, it was right to oppose slavery. In the 20th, it was right to oppose segregation and to fight poverty. In the 21st, we've been right to advocate for human rights and economic rights and justice for all.
Not to mention climate change. When you're drunk, you talk like me. Bullshitters.
I'll have you know that bullshit is a perfectly respectable scientific term.
Oh, bullshit.
Yes, bullshit. Philosopher Harry Frankfurt explains in his book On Bullshit that a lie is invented to hide the truth. Bullshit is used to persuade with no interest in the truth. Trump is a world-class bullshitter.
He's a world-class piece of...
But as I was saying, we have been morally right again and again, and they have been in the wrong again and again, and that is why they hate us. Most people don't want to think of themselves as bad people, so to balance the scales, they make up outrageous lies about the left.
Such as all the horrible things that will be forced down the American people's throats should liberals win power.
Mandatory gay Muslim abortions for everyone. The QAnon sense about pedophilia and blood drinking is part of that. I mean, the basic position of the American left is, how about we treat everyone with the same dignity and respect shown to rich white men? To which the American right has responded with murderous violence, most recently with the storming of the Capitol. And of course we've been right about their leaders. We were right that Reagan was an affable dimwit. We were right about W's cruel and incurious disposition. We were right that Trump was a malevolent narcissist who meant what he said, that he was a threat to the Republic, and that there would be a lot of unnecessary deaths if he were elected.
So what do we do?
There are some things that better information simply cannot fix. We sometimes tell ourselves that if people were better informed, they would make less harmful choices. But how much of that is wishful thinking? We saw in W's administration that Republicans were looking at Orwell's 1984 not as a warning, but as a guide. It's almost as if Hillary Clinton was right to point out that half of Trump's supporters were deplorable. She was right, and she wasn't just talking about the racists among them. There are some people who attached themselves to Trump, most of them smarter than him, who shared his goals. No one really wants to talk about those people. We don't know how to deal with the people who do the work to inform themselves about the evils of the past and then celebrate them, such as the Neo-Confederates. Yes, that picture of the Confederate battle flag in the Capitol? Most people were horrified, but too many welcomed it as the new high-water mark of the Confederacy. It's not just political leadership conning a bunch of rubes. There are well-educated people who are aware of true things but embrace false things because they prefer them. So, what do? For a lot of people, fear of difference decreases with time and familiarity. There was a study, I don't remember where, in which racial attitudes of people commuting by rail were surveyed. A cohort of non-whites were then added to the morning commute for about 10 weeks. Afterwards, the first set of commuters were surveyed again, and simply being around a more diverse crowd had reduced the racial anxiety of most of them.
Is that like how some conservatives come around to supporting LGBT rights if they have an LGBT family member?
I wonder. Certainly they want to protect people in their circle. Most people do, I think, but who is in that circle varies from everyone to no one, depending on the person.
So we just wait for them to get used to seeing people different from themselves? That won't work in small towns.
No. It's not easy being the only black or Hispanic or Muslim or atheist or gay or transgender person in a small town. That's why so many go to the cities, where they can find similar people with whom they can socialize. The Trumpists may also give up. Research shows that today's heightened focus on political identities, along with the associated anger it entails, has caused us to lose trust in our governing institutions. Negative partisanship is associated with decreased satisfaction with democracy.
That's not making me feel better, just so you know.
Let me finish. People on the losing side of elections are understandably less satisfied with their democracy than winners, but a lot of non-voters are even less satisfied.
Makes sense.
Now in 2020, voter turnout was up substantially, with about 11 million new voters, probably including a lot of former non-voters, turning out to defend Trump. He lost by a lot, so I'm thinking that a lot of Trumpists will be so dissatisfied with electoral democracy that they'll go back to being non-voters.
Now that's good news. Congratulations, Oracle. You finally gave me some solace.
Oh, that's good to hear. Now if you don't mind, I'm going to lay down and go sleepies.
Oh my god. Hey, you were so drunk last night. It was so adorable. Look, I took pictures. Here's a picture and here's a video. Look at that video. You're so adorable.